Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, and apologies for starting 5 minutes into the webinar. We were giving people a chance to join, and as we resolved the technical hitch around interpretation, my name is Anne Gadumbe. I will be co-hosting this webinar with my colleagues who work with me on the Works 2 program. We are delighted that you've made time to join us this afternoon, morning, depending on where you're calling from, or evening. On behalf of the Works 2 program, we welcome you, and we hope to spend the next 1.5 hours together. We will start with a presentation talking about the Works 2 program, and then we will give people a chance to ask questions. But before I get started, I'll ask my colleague Becky to do a few sort of housekeeping details. Over to you, Becky.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, just a couple of very brief points from me is just to let you know, first of all, that this Zoom webinar is being recorded. So please do, we'll share that with you after the webinar, the recording, and please do share that on with colleagues in your organizations or in your networks that you think would also want to see this. And also, you know, when you're asking questions and speaking, be aware that this is being recorded, and be happy that you will be being recorded during that. We'll run into the agenda in a minute, so I won't go through that, and we'll take us through the agenda. But I did just want to flag that we'll do about an hour of presenting from our programs team, and then we will be taking all questions in the second half of this webinar. So please feel free to write your questions in the Q&A tab, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. Please try and keep questions in the Q&A tab rather than the chat, just so we're able to have them all in one place. And we'll be taking all of those in the second half of the webinar. So we won't be taking questions as we present, we'll be taking them all at the end. And just to flag, I know Anne's just mentioned, we've had a couple of Zoom issues. We were really hoping to have Arabic and French translation of this webinar. And unfortunately, Zoom doesn't seem to be allowing us that functionality. So I'm very sorry that has been limited. But we do have the interpreters on the call still, and they are going to endeavour to answer and support in the Q&A and in the chat with responding in those respective languages, Arabic and French, to any questions. So apologies that that's not quite as the functionality that we wanted, but hopefully we should still be able to have that ability. Okay, I think that's all from me. I'll pass back to Anne, please, for the start of the presentation.
Thank you, Becky. And yes, as I said, welcome to this webinar. It is hosted by the Works 2 Consortium, which is a consortium, which is actually a program that is implemented by 2 consortia. One which is a research consortium, and a second one which is an implementation consortia. Our agenda will be as follows. Isa, let's get to the next slide. So we are going to talk briefly about the Works 2 program. We are going to share briefly about what's the available evidence on viral prevention, particularly evidence that came out of the previous implementation of the Works 1. This program has a precursor program that was implemented and generated some evidence. We are going to share about the thematic priorities that the innovation grants are focusing on. We will talk about the element of research, monitoring, and evaluation. Some colleagues will also talk about the budgets and the mechanism through which we intend to do the re-granting. That's the grant agreement and compliance, risk management, and timelines. This webinar today is basically on the innovation grants. We have 2 types of grants, innovation and skill. So the first webinar today is for innovation grants. which have a shorter sort of duration for concept notes, because it's a two-step process. And then for scale, the webinar will be next week on Monday, and that will be, we will not have a concept note, it will be full application. I'm putting that out here so that if there are people who are interested in applying for scale, then they could rejoin us next week. But if they want to stay, they're welcome to stay. But today's focus is going to be largely on the innovation grants. Next slide, please. So the What Works 2 program, next slide, is basically, as I said, a program that is 7 years. The first year is about to go. We just ended our inception period end of June, for 9 months. It is an FCDO funded program to identify programs that have been proven to work and scale them up, interventions that have been proven to work and scale them up to prevent violence against women. It also seeks to identify new or existing ideas that are innovative, that have the promise to prevent violence against women and girls, and also support those. So it's implemented by 2 consortia. The implementation consortia comprises of International Rescue Committee, which is the prime, Raising Voices, a Global South feminist organization based in Uganda, Breakthrough, also a Global South feminist organization working in violence prevention in India, Social Development Direct, which is a social enterprise organization based in the UK, and Care International UK. Those 5 organizations comprise the implementation consortia. The research consortia comprises of the Global Women's Institute at the George Washington University, the Equality Institute, the Children's Institute, John Hopkins, Kenyatta University, and the Aga Khan University. And so together and jointly with the support from FCDO, then we will be implementing this program. Next slide. So we are organized around 6 pillars of work, and the first one being the external engagement and influencing. We are committed to disseminating and putting out research that will be generated from this program, and also that was generated from What Works 1, so that then people in the field, be they practitioners, be they researchers, be they funders, have that information around what works on violence prevention. And so the external engagement and influencing pillar seeks to engage with the field of prevention in putting out evidence and influencing funding and funding flows in terms of putting resources to interventions that have been proven to work, as well as influencing more and better research, as well as influencing practitioners to take up the evidence. The learning partnerships, this is the pillar that will provide technical assistance to the partners that will be selected for implementation. And so we are offering it as a support to help design and implement programs in a way that they can be evaluated. We have accountability to feminist principles as our third pillar. This program, though it's a UK funded, has feminist principles and aspires to ensure that we are committed and working in ways that are empowering, in ways that are moving resources to the places and the groups that need it most. And so we do have feminist principles, and we hope to be accountable to them. We recognize it's a challenge within a commercial contract, and this is not going to be core or support or flexible funding, but we are committed to working to make sure that groups do get the funding they need. It's very specific project support, but to make sure that they actually determine how they want to spend that. We have a help desk that basically supports FCDO country offices, and FCDO is the Foreign Common Office for Development at UK Aid, and the help desk basically supports their offices across the globe that are interested in designing and implementing and supporting programs on violence prevention. We have the fund management pillar, which is the grant making pillar that will be that's the one that has put out this request for proposals, and so based on the responses we get, then we will select and do grants and the follow-ups that accompany grant making processes. In collaboration with the research consortium, as I've indicated, this is a program that's implemented by 2 consortia, working very closely to ensure that together with the partners that will be selected, we have a joint and shared research agenda to continue building and impacting the field of violence prevention. So what's the available evidence on violence prevention? Isa, let's move on to the next one. We've looked at when this program was being designed, the question that we ask ourselves is, what is the problem we are seeking to address? And again, looking at what was implemented in What Works 1, we do know that we have a proof of concept for effective small-scale interventions to prevent violence against women. That program was able to actually provide some grants and do some evaluations that were proven to work. But scale is limited. Like taking those interventions that have been proven to work to scale has been limited because there's also a limited understanding or experience of what it means to go to scale. So we are hoping that with the scale grants, we'll be able to build that understanding of what it means to go to scale in violence prevention. The other issue is innovation. So we do know that there are persistent gaps in knowledge and evidence which hamper effective responses. So whereas we were able to generate, the HORWAX one was able to generate evidence in it wasn't able to generate evidence in all the aspects of violence and where violence occurs. For instance, in conflict situations and crises, violence in most marginalized groups, violence in diverse sectors of women or other gender diverse people. And so there is innovation, but it's limited into how and it prevents violence. And then the third issue that we have been grappling with is the use of evidence. So whereas there has been some evidence generated, there is limited capacity to take it up. And also it's not been packaged in a way that is easy to disseminate or user friendly. And so it becomes hard to make use of. And so what we are seeking to do is to ensure that we put the evidence out there in ways that is digestible, that is user friendly, and that we also support partners through the TA capacity to be able to take up the evidence and use it to design interventions. Next slide. So we've also learned from What Works 1 that prevention is possible at various levels. And when we talk about prevention, we are looking at prevention at various levels. We are looking at primary prevention, where we are seeking to stop violence even before it happens by tackling the risk factors. And that could be at household level, that could be at community level. And so stop it before it starts, and through various ways like school-based approaches, community activism, norm shifting interventions at community level. We also are seeking to prevent violence at the secondary level, and this is with the aim of reducing the frequency and severity of new episodes where it has previously occurred. So interrupting that cycle of violence so that it stops happening. And so these some of the examples we're looking at is screening in health settings to be able to stop that from recurring. Issues around alcohol use management, working with high-risk groups, e.g. female sex workers, LBT communities. And then at that level we are looking at is tertiary prevention, where we do know that there are response mechanisms that address the needs of survivors. And so at that particular point, we also want to intervene so that then we can combine those interventions with others that would actually prevent and stop the recurrence of violence. So next slide, please. Then again, what did we learn from Works 1? we actually learned very critical lessons that some of the interventions that were supported under Works 1 showed reductions in violence, prevalence of violence, up to 50% in a span of 2 to 3 years. And that is significant when interventions are able to do that. So for instance, there were projects supported in DRC, in Zambia, in Ghana, in Rwanda, Tajikistan, and they were found to have halved the rates of evidence. And so this is some of the evidence that we are putting out there. It can also be found on our website. We are working through a social media campaign to try and sort of do social media tiles that are also then linking people to the web portal to be able to find some of those interventions that were found to have worked as they think about applying or designing interventions for these requests for applications. Let's keep going. And then, so from what work, again, from what works 1, some of the findings around effective interventions were that combined economic and social empowerment interventions that take a gender transformative approach were found to have worked. Community activism approaches that seek to shift harmful cultural practices and norms were found to have worked. School-based interventions using participatory approaches were also found to have worked. Group things like good schools, toolkits, cash transfers were also found to have worked, although more evidence is needed on targeting and size of transfers and sustainability of its impacts. And so couples and parenting interventions were also were found to have worked. Areas where there was insufficient evidence under Works 1 is interventions in the workplace, violence in the workplace, edutainment and mass media campaigns, marketing campaigns. And so there wasn't enough evidence to show that those have worked. Psychotherapeutic interventions, including cognitive behavioral therapy, again, was not was found ineffective. Police and justice sector interventions on their own, again, were not found effective. Programs with men and boys only did not also produce enough evidence. And conflict-related sexual violence. So when there is sexual violence within conflict settings, again, interventions at work, there wasn't sufficient evidence. In terms of the ones that were tried and found to be ineffective, is economic empowerment alone as an intervention to address IPV or non-partner sexual violence, and brief bystander interventions, those standalone interventions that are implemented as a one-off were also found not to have worked. So again, some of these can be found on the website of What Works 2 and also What Works 1. Both websites are still running, and people can visit those to sort of read some of the evidence reviews. So what is it that we are seeking to do with this program? We are seeking for over 7 years to actually support, use evidence to influence an effective global response to violence. And how we will do that is, again, as I said, we will support learning partnerships for long-term capacity and capability to deliver violence prevention. We will also support innovative ideas and test new ones that will be presented by the applicants in terms of their capacity to reduce violence. And again, as I said, we will scale up interventions that have been proven to work, and ensure that we expand their reach so that they can reach more people, and also get to try them in different contexts and see what the results would be. We will also seek to sort of graft or or integrate some of the interventions into existing interventions, but we'll talk about that more in the scale webinar next week when we're talking about what we mean by scale. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we are guided by feminist principles, and we believe as partners in this program that a feminist approach to violence prevention is critical because it puts women and girls at the heart of working to transform the core drivers of violence. And so we are seeking to be accountable to the field of violence prevention by building collaboration. We are also seeking to support interventions that will foster activism. We will strive to ensure that we will partner and support interventions that are doing no harm. We also will seek to support interventions that apply gender analysis to their work so that then they can address the root and structural causes of violence. And also we are looking to support interventions that consider intersecting layers of exclusion, knowing very well that people have come in multiple identities, and those identities don't exist in isolation. And so we will seek to work to address intersectionality in the interventions that we support. Next slide, please. So in terms of the thematic priorities that we are seeking, we are, if with innovation grants, we are looking at addressing both intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual violence for innovation grants. We also hope to support interventions on conflict-related sexual violence. As you see from what Works One, there wasn't sufficient evidence, and so we hope through the innovation grants and targeting this thematic area, we may be able to generate more evidence. We are looking at violence during and after conflicts crisis, including the COVID-19 pandemic. We all know that during COVID, incidents of IPV and violence went up significantly. And so any interesting interventions or innovations that are put forward around that would be interesting to look at. We are also looking at issues around violence in schools, workplaces, and public spaces, intersections between violence against women and girls and violence against children. And so, but looking at violence against children as a secondary outcome of the primary intervention on violence against women and girls. We are looking at addressing the thematic issue of violence against women and disability. So we have a commitment to at least 2 of the innovation grants going to address violence against women and disability. We are also committed to addressing violence against LGBT persons. And so we are also committing to identify at least 2 of the partners and applications that are seeking to address the issue of VOW and LBT. And so really we are looking at where the evidence has been, where there hasn't been sufficient evidence, building onto that, getting us to 0. So those thematic areas are areas that we think if we get interesting innovation projects, it should be able to help us generate more evidence. Next slide. So how are we defining scale before I talk about the eligibility? So I would say it's the development and implementation of new or existing ideas with a transformative ability to contribute impact with potential for future scaling. So we are looking at those innovative ideas. They could be new, they could be existing, but if you think that your idea is transformative enough and that it is an idea that also can be scaled up, please go ahead and send us your application. And so applicants, and this is a question that has come up severally, this innovation funding, as I said, we have innovation and we have skill. So for innovation funding, we are actually ring fencing it to women's rights organizations from the global south. but they may choose to partner either in consortia or with another organization, but they should be in the lead. And I will, before I end, will define what we mean by women-led women's rights organizations. They also, all the applicants in that application should be project implementers in violence against women and girls prevention, including those working in conflict and crisis contexts. We're also looking at women peace building organizations that do address issues of violence. They are eligible to apply. They must be located within the 3 priority regions of this program. And I know this is quite large in definition: Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and MENA. But we are keeping it that broad to say what we get from those 3 regions. And then we will zero down to the countries where the applicants will come from. Funding organizations are not eligible. So if it's a women's fund, just to use the example, say Mama Cash wouldn't be eligible to apply, because then we want to reduce the amount of money that we want to reduce sort of the transaction costs and make sure as much money gets to the organizations on the front line of the work as possible. Applicants must be willing to participate in the co-design of research in collaboration with the WorksTo Research Consortium, as I've indicated, because we do need to be able to generate and be able to conduct baselines. We need to conduct impact evaluations to be able to show how this intervention is actually either contributing to a reduction of evidence or not, there has to be that willingness to be able to partner for evidence generation. And again, organizations are only eligible to submit 1 concept note in each funding cycle. So if you choose to do innovation grants, you can't do innovation and then you submit another one in scale. So you will need, organizations will need to make that choice. Next slide. And so in terms of what will we consider when we are selecting this sort of innovation grants, and this is just a snapshot of some of our thinking. We think that we are looking at locally led solutions, solutions from the global south, solutions that are driven by the people on the front lines of doing this work. Interventions that are proposed for innovation need to have a potential or a clear runway to scale, either by reach or proportion of the population covered. So you'll be able to tell us this intervention is reaching this number of people in this location, but we think that it has the potential for scale to reach many more people if adapted or if implemented this way. And again, that's part of the research quest. That's how the research will be able to help us sort of know whether it can actually be adapted and replicated. The applicants need to have proven experience of working adaptively and taking a continuous learning approach. Again, because this is innovation, we we want people to feel that they are not just straight-jacketed, and there is openness to being adaptive and to learning as you go. For instance, the COVID situation that happened and people had to adapt their ways of working but continue working. So we are looking for that kind of flexibility. Interventions that are also open and adaptive to change, and interventions that include some gender transformative components, whether it's norm shifting work, whether it's rights-based approaches, whether it's intersectionality. So looking at some of those components that make them gender transformative. Next slide, please. So they must also be able to explain the innovation. What is the innovation? Why is it innovative? And how is it innovative? And what are the key questions that this innovation will seek to address? Question maybe the field of violence prevention is grappling with. Also, the intervention that is proposed for innovation will need to flag the key questions and the challenges that the violence prevention field is facing, and that your intervention, once evaluated, will generate the evidence to respond to that. We're also looking at technological and digital solutions that could be included as part of the approach. It's not a requirement that you must adapt technology or include a technological solution, but if you do know of any and you have any that you think would be able to reduce violence or lead to violence prevention, then you're welcome to add to it. And we are looking at applications that will test different combinations, intensities, or duration of approaches that might further reduce levels of violence. And when I say these intensities and combinations, it could be primary prevention interventions, social norm shift programs that are probably looking at also combining with secondary or prevention interventions, or so looking at different combinations of interventions that you will implement to reduce violence. Next slide. So again, yeah, for the avoidance of doubt, we are defining women's rights organizations as women-led Global South partners that have majority women at every level, particularly and including at the board level and across all decision-making levels of the organization. And so they must also have a deliberate mandate to protect and promote the rights of women. They must also adopt an explicitly feminist approach, and we recognize that in some contexts this may be articulated differently, but at least they should be able to sort of have some analysis, some feminist analysis in their approaches. And they should center women and girls in all their diversities. And they must also be organizations that acknowledge individual and structural gender inequality as a core driver of violence against women. So if you are a women-led organization from the Global South, you have majority of women, you fit this criteria, you can apply for an innovation grant. If you want to partner with someone else, you're free to partner with someone else, but the leadership of the design of the intervention needs to be led by women's rights organizations for innovation grants. And I hope that answers a number of questions and a number of people. So if you're an INGO, you can't be in leadership of application of an innovation grant. It has to be led by a locally led women's rights organization. Next slide, please. So I'll now hand over to my colleague, Kate, to talk a little bit about the research, monitoring, and evaluation. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Anne. Next slide, please. So an important component of this innovation grant is that we'll also be pairing each successful applicant with a partner from our What Works To Research Consortium. And the purpose of that will be to co-design a fit-for-purpose research question and evaluation to learn more about the innovation and potential for scale. And this could be anything from operational research to an impact evaluation. And so really a meaningful co-design process is part of that. We'll also be collaborating with the What Works To technical advisors in these learning partnerships to co-design, field test, monitor, and refine the scale up in innovation projects. And while we have a research consortium who will be responsible for helping to design and deliver the research component, the grantee organizations would be responsible for collecting the different monitoring, evaluation, and learning components. And then as you think about your budget for how this will be going forward, keep in mind that this will actually, the cost for the research component would actually be separate from the innovation application. And so there's a separate budget process, so no need to be concerned about the research funding at this point in time. Next slide. Thanks. And I think this is actually over to Dima, my colleague on the M&E side. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, and welcome all of you in this webinar. I will discuss more about the monitoring and evaluation part that expected from each grant holder. In our program, we have mainly 3 outcomes, and we are expecting that the grant holder demonstrate at least two of them in their proposal. Mainly our three outcome is, the first one is a measurable reduction in violence against women and girls in development and humanitarian context. The second one, second outcome that we are expecting as well is the change in the practice of the policy, drawing on what's work to evidence to inform the prevention work. This could include the policies, programs, and funding mechanism. And the third one is the recognition of women rights organizations as essential actor in the violence against women and girl prevention, which definitely will lead to improve the access to funding. So mainly, those are three our outcome, and we are expecting from the grant holder to demonstrate how the intended intervention could be contribute to at least two or more from those outcomes. Next, please. Also, we are expecting from the grants holder, when it's come to the theory of change and look frame, that it should be coincide with the FCDO template. However, we are not requesting this in this stage. We are requesting to have the theory of change and the look frame once it's come to the proposal application stage. In the different M&E plans and the different aspects when it's come to the M&E, we are expecting that the grants holder need to demonstrate and taking in consideration a strong understanding for agenda, power and context, existing learning and evidence to prevent the violence against women and girls, and definitely taking into account what's work principle of violence against women and girl prevention. Basically, this is for the M&E, but like just to make sure of the point that on this stage, the look frame and theory change, it's not requested, but it will be requested on the proposal stage. Thank you. Now leaving it to my colleague Leah.
Thank you, Dima. And I will be taking us through the budget making process. Next slide, please. Thank you. If you have had an opportunity to look at the request for proposal, it includes a budget template. And in that budget template, we have classified the costs into 6 main subheadings. These are 1, project activities. And under the project activities, we would expect to see costs that are linked to the achievement of the project activities. These are activities of what the project aims to do in order to meet the aims of the project. So these are mainly the recurrent project delivery expenditure. It is unrelated to administrative costs, staff costs, or even monitoring and evaluation, as they are covered under a different budget heading. The next budget category is capital expenditure. And here we expect to see capital expenditure, which will be funded under the project and mainly relating to purchase of assets. By assets, here we mean items that have a useful life of more than 1 year. We also note that you may use your own financial manual to recognize what are assets, though we would expect you to adhere to some of the FCDO requirements, such as the price of that asset should be regarded as an asset if it is in excess of £500. Some groups of lower value items, such as maybe pharmaceutical products or food or relief packs, if the combined value is over £500, also qualifies as an asset. You will be required to make an annual report of all the assets that you hold. You are also supposed to know that ultimately ownership is held by FCDO. This could be transferred at the end of the project cycle, at the end of the grant by FCDO. But as long as the grant is ongoing, ownership rests with FCDO. The other budget heading is around staff costs. And here we expect to see costs that typically include expenditure incurred for staffing costs. It could also, these are all the costs that are inseparable from the other overheads. It includes employment salaries. The next budget heading is on monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And as my colleague has mentioned earlier, we are having a research consortium. So monitoring, evaluation are key elements of this project. We have requested that we ring fence 10% of your total budget for costs related to monitoring, evaluation, and learning. The other budget category is around advocacy and influencing activities. And this is another budget heading that we have again asked that you ring fence about 10% of your total budget to cover costs relating to those activities. The last category is on admin costs. These are any costs that are used to support any project through your head office administration, where you do have a head office. An important point to note for costs that are classified under admin is that they should be based on actual expenditure, and they will need evidence, that is some supporting documentation such as receipts. It is not acceptable that you charge a flat rate for your admin costs, for example, having a fixed figure of say 100,000 or any other amount, or even take a percentage of your total budget and classify it as your admin costs, say 5% or 10% of your total budget as admin costs. Next slide, please. Again, with the request for proposals, we also have what you're calling the eligible cost guidance. And this is guidance that has been put together by the FCDO to guide you on what is generally acceptable or unacceptable in terms of cost. This list, it is important to note that this is not an exhaustive list, but when you go through that document, and my colleague will also be posting the link on the chat so that you can read through the eligible cost guidance and know what is generally acceptable as a cost and what is generally not acceptable. For example, it is unacceptable for you to have fundraising costs, advocacy, marketing, contingency, debt repayment. Even the cost of preparing this particular bid may not be as an acceptable cost. Some of the project-specific costs that are acceptable include costs for program support, program management costs, such as salaries and allowances, other direct program delivery costs, including your TA support, monitoring and evaluation, transport security are all eligible costs. When it comes to what we call the non-project attributable cost, or the indirect or the support or overhead costs, you'll find that things like IT infrastructure, finance and accounting costs, HR costs, oversight, legal support are all costs that are allowed to be costed to this project. Next slide, please. I will now talk about the non-project attributable costs. And these are the costs that are not feasibly allocable to a single project. They are costs that are incurred by an organization in order to support the project that it runs. They could be space or premises costs. Mainly, they are costs that relate to the whole organization and only partly support the project. To calculate your NPAC, which will be part of the cost that will be found in the budget template, you must remember that FCDO expects that it be an appropriate apportionment, and it is calculated as a percentage of core overhead costs that are deemed necessary to support your organization's charitable activities. Again, with the request for proposals, we have included an example of a template which you can use to calculate your NPAC. I will now take us through how you actually calculate your NPAC. And this is the template that has gone with the RFP. If you look at it, it has three main sections. And the first section is where you establish what is the percentage of your direct to indirect costs. So you first start by listing all the direct costs for 3 years. This is because you calculate it on a 3-year rolling average. This is the guidance that we have received from FCDO, and it is the one that you expect as a grantee or an applicant, you will also apply. You list your direct costs for year 1, 2, 3, divide by 3, and then you get the annual average. Then you list your indirect costs, which are classified into 3 main categories: administration expenses, support staff costs, and governance costs. You list them per year, and then you establish the average for the 3 years by dividing the total cost by 3. Once you have those 2 elements, you divide the direct cost over the indirect cost, and that's how you get the predicted overhead allocation percentage for inclusion in the project budget. You move on to section 2. Under section 2, you're going to list all your costs, which are all your all your costs for the 3 years. Again, this is at organizational level, and you're encouraged to use your audited financial accounts. So you will list rent rates. These are just some of the examples. It is not an exhaustive list. Maintenance and repairs, equipment, cleaning. That is how you will be able to establish all your NPAC per year. Again, you will be able to divide and get an average for an average per year. Having established the percentage and having established the average cost, Section 3 is where you now establish what is going to be chargeable to the program, and you will arrive there by taking your percentage, which you have calculated in Section 1, and taking the total cost in Section 2, and then you get the percentage so that you get the average component of your project that you're going to charge as your NPAC. Next slide. So the other guidance is on exchange rates. Budget totals must be provided in pound rate. We expect that you use the exchange rate that is found under OANDA. And please also make sure that you always quote the date, because it is what will be used to justify the rate that you have used. When you're calculating your NPAC, we expect that you're going to use your local currency, given that you're going to be using your audited accounts. However, because the budget must be shown in pounds, you will have another column showing the exchange rate used and the converted rate in pounds. A reminder that the budget remains fixed and the exchange rate used in reporting will vary according to the actual rates. The impact of fluctuating exchange rates will be borne by the grant holders. However, where significant exchange rate gains or losses are being accumulated, the partner will notify the fund manager and jointly will decide how this can be managed. In the case of adverse movements in exchange or inflation rates, the partner working with the fund manager will need to consider a range of options, including reassessing the deliverables or even seeking additional budget where that's possible from the FCDO. One thing to note is that you should not build in additional costs in your budget to protect against the risk of exchange rate. So we would not expect a line in your budget saying exchange rate or losses in your budget. Next slide, please. So the final slide on budgets is mainly just some points to keep in mind when you're formulating your budgets. And one of them is that please keep your fund manager regularly informed of forecast spend during the lifetime of the grant arrangement. That will be the expectation in case you're successful. Remember that repeated high variance against forecast is seen as a consequence of weak financial management. You're required to retain all invoices, receipts, and accounting records for the project funds for a period of up to 5 years after the expiry of the grant arrangement. You should ensure that the project funds are accounted for. You should have proper financial accountability, adequate financial management, including but not limited to adequate controls, accountability structures, and procedures. All items of expenditure must conform to the principles above and should be allowed within the agreed budget, again referring to the eligible cost guidance that has been shared. Please ensure that project funds cannot be used in violation of any relevant laws. Please, next slide. I will now hand over to my colleague to take us through the grant arrangement and compliance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Thank you. I'll be covering the grant agreement, the risk register, and also the due diligence process very briefly. And at the end, I'll go through the timeline for the concept notes. So the grant agreement, we have received a few questions already on the chat. So the grants are up to the amount of 500,000 pounds, so GBP, for a term of 3 years. And we will be using the FCDO Accountable Grant Agreement, or called AGA. The IRC will sign these accountable grant agreements on behalf of the FCDO. And basically the accountable grant agreements details and outlines the eligible expenditure, the fund disbursements, the quarterly narrative and financial reporting dates and what needs to be submitted, the due diligence recommendations and actions or mitigations following that, the monitoring, deliberation mapping of downstream partners, also of the audit requirements, risk management, asset register, and communication plan. Next slide, please. So the due diligence, the successful selected lead grantees, and this means if you're applying on behalf of a consortium, only the lead grantee will be doing the due diligence assessment. And this will cover various areas such as governance, project quality, monitoring, evaluation, grant management capacity, finance management, and human resources. This is a collaborative review and will aim to identify any development needs and assign actions to mitigate any risks to the FCDO funding. There are two steps or stages that we are doing. One of them is the first stage is around the basic eligibility screening and vetting, and some of you have already registered and start completing the concept note. We have seen these questions. And then the second stage is if successfully and if selected, then we will be doing the partner project capacity review after the grantee has been selected and before the accountable grant agreement is signed. And the grantee will provide a number of documentations to the grant management team on what works to the grant management team and participating in meetings to review areas resulting of this assessment. So these due diligence or the due diligence assessment will be submitted to the FCDO as part of the accountable grant agreement package. And so next slide, please. This section covers risk management, and again, this is one of the critical areas that FCDO and us as the fund manager we will need to look into. The key, so it is expected that the grantees will be identifying and managing and risk liquid impact on the implementation of the project by developing a project risk register. This template will be provided as we move to the from the concept note to the full application. And again, as part of the good project management, this risk register should be updated and submitted as part of the quarterly reporting. Some of the key areas that we are looking into is data diversion and fraud. So there is a zero tolerance approach towards corruption, fraud, and misuse of funds. And then we will also be looking into safeguarding, and in particular, again, the FCDO has a zero tolerance approach on any issues related to sexual exploitation, abuse, and sexual harassment. And we will be providing a training or providing an information session to all the selected grantees on safeguarding and how to report any concerns related to safeguarding. Thank you. Next slide, please. Right. So this is our last slide before we move into the questions and answers. And this is basically just to provide you with an overview of the scale and innovation projects timeline. So the request for proposals was released on the 29th of July. We are now during the submission window. We will be closing the concept notes beginning of September. For the scale will be slightly later, but also in September. Then we'll be reviewing and involving a number of technical reviewers and also involving FCDO and our independent advisory board on the selection of the grants, the grantees. We'll aim to confirm the outcomes in due diligence and start the due diligence process around November, December, with the intention to have all the accountable grant agreements signed beginning of 2023. So this is the timeline that we're working towards to. So thank you so much. And I'll now hand over to Anne. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. So thank you so much, Teresa, for bringing us to the close. We are right on top of the hour, 1 hour, and we have time for Q&A. There's been a lot of questions on the on the chat, on the Q&A, and we are trying as much as we can to respond to some of those. But I would want to give people a chance to actually ask loudly, verbalize their questions. But before I do that, I want to just make one clarification, because I think it wasn't very clear. This consortium, these two consortia that are implementing this program are not eligible. All the members you see, if you can, Isa, if you can go back to the first slide with all the consortium partner, yes, here, there, all those partners, none of these are actually going to be eligible to apply for the funds, because I think some of the questions were not clear. I think some people thought they have to partner with one of these organizations. No, these organizations are not eligible to apply, because we are the implementers, and then we have insider information, which then would disadvantage others in the application. So it's the applicants are not going to be part of these two consortia, but we will work with you as in fund management and in the research and in the technical assistance provision. So do we have people who want to raise their hands? And I can't see because of the presentation. Maybe Isa, we stop sharing for now, and so we can see whether people are raising their hands.
Thanks, Anne. I can go through some of the questions that have been answered in the Q&A box.
All right.
If we need
Go
more
ahead.
clarification, we can ask people to unmute and provide a bit more clarification, and we can also go to hands up. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll try to get through or as many of you as we can, but there are as Anne says, quite a lot of questions. I think just to start off, I can see there's been a lot of questions in both the chat and the Q&A box about sharing the presentation and sharing this recording with participants on the webinar today. We will be sharing this presentation. We'll also be sharing this whole recording on our website once it's finished. I posted the website address in the chat box, so hopefully everyone should have that. But this recording and the presentation will be going up on the website after this call. We'll also endeavour to answer all the questions that have been asked, even if we don't get to them in this Q&A session, and we'll update the frequently asked questions document, which is also on the website, with answers to all the questions that have been asked today. So I'll move on, and I'll try and cover as many of these questions in the Q&A box as we can. We'll also go to people with hands up, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So a lot of the questions in the Q&A have been asking about country eligibility. I don't know if Teresa, you could come in and just say a bit about the priority regions and what countries are eligible to apply, just to clarify that for everyone on the call.
Sure, thank you so much, Becky. So the priority list countries, you'll find this list on our website. If you go to the, and I will post it here on the What Works To website, and then you'll have the list of that list of ODA recipients, and then you can consult this list and see if the country is eligible or the organization based in this country is eligible to apply for. The only caveat is this: What Works To is working in 3 priority regions, and these are Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, and Middle East and North Africa. Unfortunately, we are not able to cover South America on this occasion. This is where we are working at the moment, but please do follow the link to the list of the priority regions and countries. Thank you.
Thanks, Teresa. And then linked to that, we have another question from Dina, who says, are regional networks able to apply, especially those who have focal points and NGO partners in humanitarian contexts, or the focus is on, or is the focus on local kind of country-based consortium or coalitions?
Please ask that again, Becky.
Adina's question is, are regional networks able to apply, or is there more of is the focus on local or just country-based consortia or coalition?
Thank you for that question. If there's a regional network that thinks they want to do an innovation grant, then they are free to apply as long as they're led by local women's rights organizations. So it's up to them to tell us how the idea is innovative and how they will actually co-implement it as a network. So that is fine.
Great, thanks, Anne. We've also had quite a few questions about the funding amount. I think we've clarified in the chat that the maximum funding amount is £500,000. Could Anne or Teresa, there's questions also about a minimum. Is there a minimum amount?
So as I said at the beginning, we have two types of grants: innovation, which this webinar is actually focusing on. Today, we will have another one for scale next week on Monday. For innovation, the maximum, you can apply up to £500,000 for 3 years. We don't have a minimum. So again, leaving it up to organizations to determine in what their innovation will cost to implement.
Thanks, Anne. Another question that's come up quite a bit is, can individual organizations apply, or does it have to be consortia?
Yes, individual organizations are open to apply. If a women's rights organization feels that they are capable of applying for an innovation grant, they are free to apply on their own, or they could decide they want to partner with anyone else. We are not restricting that. So yeah, and a women's rights organization that thinks they have an innovative idea and they can implement it on their own are free to apply.
Great, thank you. Another question that's come up a bit is around INGOs. So Sarah's asked, would a women's rights organization that is registered in the Global South and operates independently but has an international affiliate be eligible to apply? We've also had questions around if an application is led by a women's rights organization, can an INGO partner be a partner in the consortium or be a fiscal sponsor in the consortium?
Yes, the first question on whether a locally registered women's rights organization with an affiliate can apply, the answer to that is yes, they can apply if they are locally led and they choose to partner with their affiliate or on their own, they can apply. In terms of whether an INGO can also apply, as long as the women's rights organization is in the lead and wants to partner with the INGO, they can apply, but the INGO cannot be the lead. And so, yeah, but they have to outline what roles each of the partners are going to play. But for scale grants, it will be open. We are not ring fencing that for women's rights organizations. And we'll talk about that more on Monday next week.
Great, thanks. And we've had quite a few questions as well about how many grants will be awarding in the innovation window.
That question, we will only know how many grants we'll be able to award once we receive the applications and know the numbers. Again, once we know some, we've already received some indications of organizations that are not applying for the full amount of 500,000. And so depending on how many applications we select and the amount of funding organizations are asking for, then we'll be able to determine how many grants we make in the end.
Great. Thanks, Anne.
Sorry, Becky, could I just interrupt? I would encourage anyone who would like to ask questions in French, please do so. We do still have our French interpreter with us, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, please do so. Please do raise your hand and please do ask your questions in French.
Yes, this is Ibrahim, the French interpreter. We have a question from someone in DRC who are asking whether, like if they can just submit their project in French, and I just write it down so that you can just answer, and I'll be just more welcome to answer to the participant. Thank you.
Teresa or Anne, are you able to come in and answer whether we can accept applications in French or another language?
Unfortunately, we are not able to accept applications in French. We issued the RFP and the guidance note in French, but we will not be able to have to receive applications in French for challenges of review. So yeah, but the guidance and the the guidance note is in French, but we'll only accept applications in English.
That's correct. And if you are able to register on the website, on the tab resources or files, you will see the application form also translated in French and also in Arabic. So this is just for guidance only, but it will help you to prepare the concept note, but unfortunately our system will not allow it to submit it in other languages apart from English. Thank you.
Donc voilà, si je peux aller rapidement pour les francophones pour juste dire, I'm trying to answer to the francophone what you have just said. Okay, do you mind if we can just...
Thank you.
Yeah. Donc, elle dit qu'on ne peut pas soumettre exactement le projet en anglais, en français, c'est forcément en anglais, mais les guides sur leur site sont en français pour guider les gens à comment faire exactement la note conceptuelle. Mais le fait de soumettre le projet doit se faire forcément et uniquement en anglais, pas en français. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks very much. We have had quite a few questions come through about the deadline, some confusion. I don't know if Teresa, you can just clarify the deadline for the innovation grant specifically.
Je ne sais pas si vous avez des problèmes avec les délais aussi pour les francophones qui sont sur ce webinaire. Si vous avez des problèmes aussi avec les délais, il faut nous dire comme ça, on va vous éclaircir par rapport à cela.
Okay. So the deadline to submit the concept note for the innovation grants is 2nd of September, midnight 2nd of September, and this is a GMT time. And I also have seen quite a number of questions related to the registration, and I think we will be providing you with how to register and how to proceed with the completing your concept note.
Great, thanks, Teresa. We've had some questions come in on the co-design. So at what stage will the co-design begin? Will that be at concept development level or after the concept development has been approved?
I'm happy to answer that. That will be after the concept note is approved, and we are not. Yeah, so once we submit the concept note and it's selected, then that is the point at which we'll offer the technical support and assistance for co-design.
Thanks, Anne. We've also had a question around lobbying and advocacy. So I think this is also relating to the ineligible costs layer that you talked through. But they say, can we provide a bit more information on lobbying and advocacy work being ineligible? What if an intervention aims to empower rights holders to engage with policymakers to lobby for responsive laws or policies, for example? Is that eligible in terms of eligible costs? I don't know if Leah or Anne could take that one.
Thanks, Becky. And I think when you talk about advocacy, If you look at the budget template, we have already, it's actually one of the budget headings. So, and we have actually requested that you ring fence 10% of your total budget for activities around advocacy and influencing activities. I think from the FCDO eligible cost guidance, what is clear is that activities around lobbying and advocacy, unless it is project attributable, that is when it will not be eligible. But if it is project attributable, then that is an eligible cost. Costs that will not be eligible are especially the ones that relate, for example, to this bid or this proposal. If you're doing any advocacy, any lobbying towards this, then that is not an eligible cost. I hope that's clearer.
Thanks, Leah. We've had a couple of questions as well about startup companies. So are startup companies eligible to apply, or companies that have maybe not been in place for longer than a year, or must these companies be registered as an NGO or a local organisation? I don't know, Anne, you could maybe take that one.
Yes, I'm happy to take that one. So startups, well, the criteria is quite clear that you must have been in operation for at least 3 years, and you must be a women-led, you must be working in the area of women's rights organizations. So if a women's rights organization decides to partner with a startup, they are free to partner. We are putting the power in line with our feminist principles in the hands of women's rights organizations to determine who it is that they want to partner with and to demonstrate how that partnership will lead to achieving the innovation that they are proposing. So we can't receive an application from a startup that is not in partnership with a women's rights organization.
Thanks, and we've also had a question around funding organisations. So we clarified on the webinar that funding organisations are not eligible to apply. Can we give a bit more information about what that means?
Yes, so for instance, if your organization does re-granting, so for instance, if I gave the example, if you're a women's fund, for instance, that seeks to apply for these funds, and then you do another call for applications for organizations to apply, you will not be eligible to apply. The reason being that we want to reduce the administrative costs that we will spend as a fund manager, that another fund that seeks to re-grant will spend. And so we want to keep as much money to ensure that they go directly to the organizations that are doing the work. So if you are asking to, as a fund, to apply so that then you can do a call for applications, then we will not be able to qualify. They are not eligible to apply.
Thanks, Anne. Another question around, it's more of a finance question, so maybe for Leah, is for these innovation grants, is co-funding allowed? So are you allowed to kind of provide funding for an ongoing project that's already in operation?
So so that I get this right, they are already implementing and they have some funds and they want to add on to that intervention?
I think so, yeah. They say, e.g., with an ongoing project.
That probably feels like it might be more suitable for scale, but I would say if it's an interesting innovation and they are a women's rights organization, they should go ahead and apply.
Thanks, Anne. There's a few questions coming through finance related around percentages of project costs. So Leah, is there any advice on how much of the budget percentage should go to admin costs or indirect costs, and what kind of things do the admin costs cover? And could you also talk a bit more about what you mean by receipts for admin costs? Is one of the questions.
Sorry, Becky, the last part of your question was?
It's a question about the percentages of the budget. So what percentage should be admin or indirect costs? And is there a maximum percentage for that? And then what does the kind of admin and indirect costs cover? And can you also talk a bit more about what you mean by receipts for admin costs? I think maybe that was mentioned in your presentation.
Thanks, Becky. So in the budget template that we gave out with the request for proposals, there are only 2 budget headings that we gave a threshold. So when it comes to monitoring, evaluation, and advocacy, those are the only 2 areas we have said that should be at a minimum 10% of the total budget. We left the rest of the budget headings for you as an organization to figure out how much of your costs will go to each of those budget headings. We did not want to be very prescriptive, so we are giving you the leeway to just formulate your budget based on what you're aiming to achieve with this grant. I think what is important to note that is just there are some reasonable expectation in terms of, for example, how much you're going to charge on your salary costs, maybe on your other line of capital expenditure. So it's just that at the end of the day, it should be reasonable. It should be appropriate. So we are not going to tell you how much your salaries should cost. That will be dependent on your organization, what you already have in place, your policies. So we would not be defining that. It will be defined by what you're aiming to achieve. When it comes to admin costs, we said that admin costs, these are some of the costs. If, for example, you have a head office, these are the costs that are going to be an appropriate and a justifiable apportionment of your costs. So if, for example, you're being charged some HR related costs by your head office, then a small proportion of that can be charged to the project. It is important to note that when you're calculating your admin costs, you must ensure that you're not having duplication, so that you do not charge admin costs and then go ahead when you're calculating your NPAC, as we have gone through how you calculate that, you do not charge admin costs and then you go ahead and charge the same cost as part of your NPAC. Yeah, I hope I've answered the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. We've also had a couple of the same question come through around the difference. What is the difference between innovation grants and scale-up grants? Just to clarify.
Yes, I'm happy to clarify that. So innovation, we're defining innovation as either the development of a new idea or an existing idea that you think if you implement it, it will be able to reduce or prevent violence against women and girls in their diversities. So we are looking for some ideas that could actually be tested, for their ability to prevent violence. Scale is where an intervention has already been proven to work, and you want to actually take it to scale, to expand it, to reach more people, to reach a wider geography, to have a bigger impact, to adapt it in a different context. So, but it has already been proven to work. So innovation is new or existing ideas that are innovative and have the promise of reducing violence. Scale is already tried and tested idea that you want to actually take to scale or expand to reach more people in terms of violence prevention. I hope that answers it. And I would invite whoever asked that question to join the skill webinar next week on Monday, because we have slightly different application processes for both.
Thanks, Anne. Another question around the kind of innovation and scale, I guess. Can an organisation be, or could an INGO specifically in this question, be a sub on both an innovation and a scale application?
No, you can only be you can only do it in one. If you choose to go under innovation as a sub, or if you're partnering with a local women's organization as part of the, maybe sub is a wrong language to use, as a partner in the implementation of the innovation, then you can only do one. So organizations are only eligible to either apply for innovation or for scale. Even if you're not the lead, you get to choose either one of those two.
And then another question, maybe slightly similar, is could an INGO be a sub-recipient on more than one application within the innovation grant funding?
Well, that is what I just answered, that they can only be in one application. So if you choose to, if you're approached or if you choose to partner with a women's rights organization to implement an innovation, then you won't be eligible to do it for scale.
Or another innovation.
Yeah, or another innovation, yeah.
Right, that's perfect. Other questions? Finance related question for Leah. Is there a requirement that applicants need to be managing a certain level of budget annually in order to be eligible?
Thanks, Becky, for that question. I don't think we have an amount of the budget that a partner needs to have been managing. The only requirement is that they should not be new, like my colleague Anne has explained. So, and you have seen, like, for example, when you're calculating NPAC, we are using the last 3 years of operation. Yes.
So yeah, I think there's a question in the application that basically is around track record. Have you implemented a program like this before? Have you, you know, and so 3 years of audited accounts, and if you can't provide that, then you need to give us a reason why you can't do that. So then there does need to be a certain level of capacity or track record for you to apply. Yeah, but we don't state that you must have managed a grant of, say, 200 million. We are not prescribing the amounts you ought to have managed, but you do need to demonstrate some level of capacity and track record.
Thanks both. There's a couple of questions around the definition of a women's rights organization. So I know we've provided that definition, but just to maybe clarify a few questions on if an organization has full gender parity in the board, and their board has a kind of women majority, but the CEO is a male, or the president is a male, are they eligible to apply? Do they count as a women's rights organization?
I think the standard, the test there should be, are they a majority women-led organization? And a majority is that at least over 50% of their board members of the senior leadership are women. Then they would qualify as a women-led organization. I don't know, we can't be too prescriptive to say you have to have this number of people, but at least over half of your people in leadership and in the board and in the governance and in senior management ought to be women.
Thanks, Anne. Another question is around type of kind of innovation and intervention. So are we most interested in primary, secondary or tertiary innovations and interventions?
Again, if I go back to evidence, prevention, we look at prevention at 3 levels: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Some of the evidence from WACS 1 or that is available has shown that, for instance, tertiary prevention alone, say justice intervention programs alone, do not necessarily have not proven to be effective. So you would have to possibly partner those with other more primary interventions like social norm change. So yeah, we are not looking at just one type. It's just showing how your innovation will actually contribute to a reduction, and also based on the evidence. And that's why it would be important to visit the website, both the WACS 2 website, and there's also a website for WACS 1. We've populated both websites with evidence on what works. And so it would be good to sort of craft interventions that speak to where the evidence is leading. Or if you don't have evidence already for innovation, you're trying a new idea, then it's also good to know what has been proven to work and build on that, or create an intervention that would answer that. And if it's an intervention that you want to prove that works, then you will have to then demonstrate how it's innovative, why it's innovative, and how you think it will reduce violence.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, I appreciate there's an awful lot of questions coming through in the chat and the Q&A. I'd like to kind of give a bit of time for people to ask their own questions, because I realise I'm reading them out and I might be missing nuances or questions entirely from people that want to ask. So we've got about 15 minutes left of the webinar. If you have a question that hasn't already been answered, please do put your hand up. I can see there are already some hands up. If one of those, if your hand is related to a question that's already been answered, please take it down. If not, please put your hand up and I'll come through the chat now and unmute people and ask you to ask your own questions, if that's okay. So first hand I can see is Prawoto Pras. I'm going to unmute you now. You may have to unmute yourself as well, but please go ahead and ask your question, Prawoto. You're currently muted. Are you able to unmute yourself? Yeah. We can't currently hear you, Prawoto. You're showing as unmuted, but we can't hear you at all. I don't know if you maybe have a microphone that you could use. I'm not sure what's going on there, but we can't hear you, Prawoto. I'm really sorry. If you ask your question in the chat or the Q&A, I'll look out for your name and try and read that one out. But thanks. I'll move on to the next hand. Hopefully we have more success. Kenneth McIntyre. I'll unmute you now. Please go ahead and ask your question. You should be able to unmute yourself now. Kenneth, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question? You should be able to unmute. I'm not sure why that's not working. I'll try one more and we might have to go back to reading them from the chat if this doesn't work. Doris, I can see you have your hand up. I'm trying to ask you to unmute now. Doris, if you're able to unmute and ask your question, please do go ahead.
Allô?
Hello, we can hear you.
Oui, vous m'entendez?
Please go ahead. Thanks.
Bon, j'ai une question par rapport aux organisations qui vont postuler. Est-ce que
So I have a question about the organization that have to submit.
Est-ce que les organisations internationales vont-ils être des co-demandeurs ou bien ils vont être des entités affiliées? J'ai pas bien saisi la façon que les organisations internationales vont postuler.
Okay, for the international organization, are they going to be affiliated or just, you know, like applicants for this program? I didn't understand that quite clear, the process of international organizations.
Autre question, c'est pas si je peux terminer toutes les questions et puis vous allez me répondre après.
Yeah, another question. I don't know if I can just, you know, like go ahead for the question before you can just give me the answer for both.
Ici au Burundi, il y a des organisations nationales qui ont une expérience avérée dans la prévention des violences sexuelles basées sur le genre. Et nous avons déjà identifié une organisation avec laquelle nous allons postuler ensemble. Nous étant une organisation confessionnelle, notre organisation c'est RCBIF, Raison des confessions religieuses pour la promotion de la santé et le bien-être intégral de la famille. Alors, je voudrais savoir si nous pouvons être des co-demandeurs pour former leur consortium.
Okay, the following question is the one, as here in Burundi, since we are a national, we have a national organization down here in Burundi, and would like to know, because we have already identified one national organization, which is, like into the confessional organization, which is RCBFI, and could we be, can we be, for example, like ask her for this organization or just be affiliated to that so that we can submit for this organization to be, eligible.
Une autre question, c'est par rapport à l'inscription. Et il nous a été difficile de s'inscrire sur le portail IRC. On nous dit qu'il y a un problème sur le portail. Oui.
Okay, we have another question, which is for the subscription. We couldn't access to the portal of the IRC because we are just we're getting notified that we couldn't access to that portal.
Okay, je vous remercie beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know if you're able to answer some of those around the pairing with other organizations in the portal.
Yes, Becky, thank you. Do you think I can share my screen? I think it will be easier to share my screen.
Yes, yeah, go
yes, ahead. And again, please do translate this into French and Arabic as well, if you can, or please do it into the chat. We will be updating our frequent asked questions document, and one of the things that we will be including is how to apply. So a guidance step by step on how to apply. But in the meantime, I'm just going to share my screen and explain just briefly, because I'm aware of the time, just briefly on how to do it, if that's okay. So if you see my screen, you go to grants and apply here. You will have the call for innovation grant concept note applications, and you'll find a link register here to apply. If you click here, you'll be taken to this screen. This here, you need to register first. I'm not going to do it because I will have them to go to my email to check my email. But you should be able to register. So with your first name, last name, your email address. Your email address is really important because you will receive a verification code on your email, and you need to enter that verification code on the next step. As soon as you do that, you should be able to move into the next screen. And I have to stop sharing so I can move to my next screen. Just a second, please.
Nous avons déjà fait ça.
Already done this. We have already done this.
Mais on nous répond à, donc il y a lors de l'enregistrement, on donne
During
un
the
code de
registration,
vérification.
we have a verification code during the subscription.
Okay.
Et que nous allons mettre sur le
That we're
portail là.
put in the portal.
Mais on nous répond qu'il y a une erreur de vérification.
But we have as an answer that we have a verification error mistake.
Okay. In that case, I would ask you please to email us on what works.
Donc dans ce cas, voilà.
And I will, oui.
Donc dans ce cas-là, on vous suggérerait de nous envoyer un mail au niveau de W2 What's-Work arrobase. Go ahead.
Ok. Bon, je croyais que. Bon, ok. Merci. Merci.
Thank you very much.
Une autre question, c'est par rapport au budget.
Another question is about the
budget fonctionnement.
For the functions budget.
Je voudrais savoir le pourcentage du budget de fonctionnement, donc les coûts administratifs et les coûts des activités.
So, we would like just to know about the functioning budget, about the admin expenditures, and pouvez-vous le dire, Monsieur Doris? Pouvez-vous répondre à votre question?
Bon, je voudrais savoir le dispatch, le pourcentage à ne pas dépasser pour le costing of management et les coûts des activités.
And the activities cost, I would like to know about the activities cost and the percentage that we don't have to go beyond.
Yes.
Terence, was it clear for you?
Another question, je voudrais savoir si, pardon.
I'd like to know if
je voudrais savoir si les organisations qui vont postuler vont faire une certaine contribution. Est-ce que s'il y a une contribution que nos organisations vont mettre sur le projet, c'est combien? C'est à quel pourcentage?
Okay, I would like also to know about the percentage of as an organization that we have to contribute if we are just going to finance this project. How much could we pay for as a percentage as an organization, applicant organization?
Okay.
Are you able to take that one, Leah?
Yeah.
It wasn't clear to me. And did you get it?
No, they are asking how much, whether they are what's the percentage of admin costs that they can apply for?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Again, we are not prescribing. We just hope it is proportionate, and how we showed how you're going to calculate it anyway. The impact will be first of all, you'll have to establish your direct to indirect costs, and then use your 3 years to establish how much is your average cost and get that percentage. We do not have a percentage. We only have ring-fenced only 2 budget headings, one on advocacy and influencing, and the other one on monitoring and evaluation. All the other budget headings will be as per your organizational costs. We are not giving a percentage of that. Thank you.
Voilà, donc la réponse rapidement, brièvement, est que ça ne durera pas de pourcentage exactement au niveau des organisations qui vont soumettre leurs documents, mais le plus important, il faut savoir que, c'est-à-dire, nous avons aussi quelques quotas au niveau de la plaidoyerie, mais il n'y a pas à proprement dit une part qu'on dit un pourcentage dédié pour les organisations à rembourser. Mais on attend de faire les calculs et nous allons vous revenir par rapport à ça un peu plus tôt, un peu plus tard.
Great, thanks very much. I can see we're nearly at time, so I'll go to one more person for a question, and then we'll endeavour to answer all the rest in the frequently asked questions. If you make sure that your question is written in the chat or the Q&A, we will make sure we answer those in the frequently asked questions. I'll go now to Freya Alexander. I can see in the has got your hand up. You should now be able to unmute yourself if possible and ask a question.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you fine, thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks. I had a question about eligibility in this tranche. So the grant awards that are happening this year, scale and innovation. My understanding is that INGOs can lead on a scale grant, but can only be a sub-partner on an innovation grant, and that we have to choose between them. And does that relate to the grant mechanism as a whole, or only the first tranche, i.e. the awards that are happening this year? So for example, if an organisation applies for an innovation grant this year, does it preclude them from being able to apply in 2025? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and thank you for that question. No, it will not preclude you from applying in 2025. And as a matter of fact, we one part of the reason of a two-step the two windows is that maybe some of the innovations or the innovative ideas may need further support 3 years down the line. So it doesn't preclude you from applying for the second window, which will be in 2025, as you say.
Thank you. And sorry, just one follow-up, which is just, so to confirm, that means that an INGO could sub on an innovation grant this year and then lead on a scale grant in the next window, but can't do that this year?
Well, on now, yes, if I understand you correctly, if you want to do an innovation grant, partner with a women's rights organization, then you can do that. When we come to the window 2, then we will do another open call, and at that point, if you do decide to want to apply for skill, still nothing would stop you from that. We are hoping to also learn from this first window, and so a lot of the decisions again around window 2 will be made based on the learnings that we are getting from window 1.
Great. Thanks very much, everyone, for your questions. I know we're over time, so I'll end the Q&A there. Like I said, please share your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll endeavour to answer those. We'll update our frequently asked questions document, and we'll post that on the website. We'll also be sharing the recording and the presentation on the website as well. I'll hand over to Anne to close, if that's okay.
Thank you so much. I think it's good to see this level of interest, and we hope we've tried to answer your questions as much as we can. We realize there's a lot more we haven't been able to answer. We shall endeavor to provide answers. We'll also check out the system, but especially for those people who are having challenges on registering or starting applications, and be able to work with the backend support to ensure those are resolved. But keep sending your challenges to the email that has been provided for troubleshooting, and we'll aspire to respond to them as quickly as possible to ensure that you have time to apply. So once again, thank you for joining the webinar. For those interested in skill, we will have another webinar. I want to correct the date. It's Wednesday next week on the 17th. More details will be shared online and through our Twitter handle. And Once again, thank you very much.